guys, what's going on? It's Ash here coming at you today in Clash Royale, and here I am in the clan 34 grand challenges in a row. And that's right, I don't know if this is like some sort of a world record, but I'm here with Ali, and I actually checked the pronunciation of his name. So Ali here has won 34 grand challenges in a row. I'll go ahead and put up a screenshot of a couple of those grand challenges from his log, or I should say a couple screenshots of a few of those grand challenges. But this guy has been messaging me for a few days now. He's an Italian guy, so our time zones are a little bit off, but he's been dominating with this Miner Control deck in grand challenges, and I'm here to give you his pro tips to help you guys have success with the deck too. So throughout this video, we'll be sharing not only his accomplishment, which is insane. I mean, what is he, some sort of a machine or something? I mean, how about you guys? How many grand challenges have you won in a row? What's the most? Or classic challenges? What is your all-time record? Mine is a pathetic 2. Yeah, that's right, 2. I've won 2 in a row before, and, you know, I was pretty happy about it. But this guy, Ali, 34 in a row. So he gave me an incredibly long write-up on this deck, so I kind of consolidated it, and I'm going to share it with you guys today. So let's get right into it here. And what better place to start? Oh, by the way, we're going to talk about the starting hand of this deck and how to play it properly. We're going to talk about the miner. We're going to talk about prediction plays and the role that they play in this deck. And we're going to talk about this deck and how to counter every single archetype in the game. So that way, we're at whatever the meta is doing. And I should note that Ali's played this deck throughout the last 4 to 5 months, he said. So he plays this throughout various metas. It's a classic control deck, and he said he's very confident in this deck. He doesn't see changing it in any way depending on what happens in the future of the meta, especially with the balance changes just hitting. Also, we will talk about substitutions at the end in case you guys don't have log, or maybe you want to play this deck with Rocket or Poison. We'll talk about how and what cards to sub in for those different variations. So let's get right to it. What better place to start than the first play of the entire match? I asked Ali what his ideal first play with this deck is, and he said there are 4 options with this deck, but there are 2 that are far better in his mind than the other 2. So let's talk about the 2 best options for your first play. Now, if you have Musketeer in your deck, he said that's always going to be his first play. Musketeer behind the King Tower is your first play, and that allows you to kind of move from there. We'll talk about that in just a second. But the second play that he has for the first play is the Ice Spirit at the bridge. Now that's to help cycle if he doesn't have the Musketeer in hand, and the Musketeer is the 5th card up. So if for whatever reason you don't have the Ice Spirit or the Musketeer in your hand or as the 5th card up, then you can play the Ice Golem in back. It's not the ideal first play. It kind of leaves you a little bit vulnerable to a big strong push where you're going to need it to kite Elite Barbs, for example, but more often than not you're going to be just fine with the Ice Golem in back. And then the 4th option, one that he doesn't like to do, maybe if you're on tilt and you want to be super aggressive, you can send in the miner, but it is a risky move. The reason it's a risky move is because what if your opponent has an elixir collector in their deck? If they do, you're going to be wasting a miner, and then you're going to have no choice but to either fireball the elixir collector or allow your opponent to get a sizable elixir advantage on you, all for what? A few hundred chip damage from the miner. It's not necessarily worth it. So that would be his 4 options for the first play of the match. Again, the Musketeer behind the King Tower is the ideal start, followed by an Ice Spirit at the bridge. It's a free, what is it, 150 damage at tournament level standards, is something around there. It's a great little chip for 1 elixir. If they do defend it, it lets them make the first move, and then you can react to them. Either way, it's a pretty decent starting play. So now that you've got your Musketeer in the back, what is going to be your second play? How are you going to go from there? Because it's all nice and well to know what you're going to do for the first play, but then what? You know, then what are you going to do? So 9 times out of 10, Ali says that he's just going to go ahead and protect that Musketeer with the Ice Golem. That's always going to be his second play of the match if he has it in hand, which more often than not he does. So you're playing the Musketeer, and then you're playing the Ice Golem. After that, you're going to wait for the opponent to see what they do, right? So they could play, obviously, so many different combinations from there, depending on what the meta is, depending on what their deck is. But what you want to do is react to what they do. You can turn it into a miner push. That would be your aggressive play. So you could send in your miner after that. We're going to talk about the miner in just a second, though, because there are some specific things that you're going to want to note when sending in your miner for the first 1 or 2 times of the match. So moving on, you can send in the miner, or you can fireball depending on what your opponent does. Maybe they drop a musketeer in back of their crown tower. Maybe they drop archers. One thing about this deck, and we're going to get a little bit more into this as we talk about predictions, but this is a chip deck. You have a lot of defensive firepower in this deck, so you have to use your fireball for chip damage throughout the match. Now, you're not going to be totally stupidly aggressive with the fireball. You still want to make sure you get some value other than just fireballing a lone tower. You never want to do that. But if the opponent makes the mistake of dropping archers, or even a mega minion, especially if you're at full elixir just kind of hanging out, waiting for the opponent to do something, go ahead and take that opportunity to do that damage to the tower. You're going to do 229 chip damage to that tower via the fireball. So when you can get some value out of that fireball, go ahead and use it. So going back to your first play, or your first sequence of plays, it's going to be musketeer, it's going to be ice golem, then you're going to react. So you really have 4 options. You can send in the fireball, you can send in the miner, you can send in the log, or you can reset and do nothing. And resetting and doing nothing, sometimes it's just a smart play. Sometimes you don't want to overextend your hand, especially on the first sequence of a match. You'll be showing your entire hand to your opponent, and oftentimes if you don't have an obvious play, sometimes the answer is not to make a play at all. Just play smart defense to counter whatever your opponent does. Okay, so let's move on to the miner and his role in the deck. So it's been a while, right, since Control has been super popular in the meta. So let's kind of take a step back and review what the whole philosophy as far as offense is with this deck anyway. I mean, the miner is going to be one of your main sources of chip damage. Most of the time, the miner is going to be going in solo for Ali. Ali said sometimes he'll combo it with either the ice golem or the minions after a successful defense, but sometimes, or most of the times I should say, the miner's just going to go in there and do a few hundred damage and get out. That's going to be your chip damage throughout the match. Now, placement is super important. I mentioned this earlier, but Ali said especially with Tornado gaining traction, especially with really skilled players, NATO can pull the miner into the King Tower to activate it. And if the King Tower is activated, that's going to be big issues for you, especially playing a chip deck where you can't rely on those monster big beatdown pushes. So do not activate the King Tower with the miner. To avoid that, the first 2 to 3 times you send in the miner, you have to place him either in the back to the side away from the King Tower, or to the side, the far side away from the King Tower. The first 2 or 3 times, just to vet out your opponent's cards and make sure they're not sitting on that tornado. It's a preemptive defensive play, but it's smart, and you have to think smart, especially when you're going against good players. Otherwise, with this deck, if they don't have the Elixir Collector, go ahead and use the miner throughout the match as chip damage. That's going to be your win condition, along with the fireball chip damage. And of course, if you can get lucky, maybe the musketeer comboed with, as you can see right now, the miner will be tanking for the musketeer or even the minions. So what if they have the Elixir Collector? What are you going to do differently? Well, it's pretty obvious, but there is a little trick that Ali told me he likes to use when targeting the opponent's Elixir Collector. So any smart opponent, they'll know that you have the miner, and they'll always place the Elixir Collector in front of their King Tower. So what you want to do is that's going to put your miner in range of both of the crown towers, and he's only going to be able to do about 40% damage or so to that Elixir Collector, especially if they drop any defenses, if he's in range of both of the towers. So what Ali does to kind of mitigate that damage is he drops the Ice Golem at the bridge, and then he waits for that Ice Golem to aggro by that King Tower in that lane, the Crown Tower in that lane, and then he'll send in the miner. That way way the miner's only being targeted by one of the towers. That will allow him to get about 80% damage off of the elixir pump instead of about 50%. So that's going to be far advantageous for you, and there's no worries of him totally taking it out and aggroing onto the king tower and activating it, so you don't have to worry about that. The prediction plays, I said they're really important, and I should mention that using the log and the fireball predictively is a huge part of this deck. That's what led Ali to win 34 grand challenges in a row. By the way, he got beat. He won 10 in a row. That's what ended his streak. The streak is not currently on anymore. So yeah, 10 matches in a row to fail the grand challenge, quote unquote. So predictions. The log has to be used on Skarmy or guards as a predictive play and to do chip damage to the tower. The log is not doing a heck of a lot of damage, but it's underrated because the more logs you use, the more, 100 HP or so at a time, that tower is going to be chipped away. You can see the log just going into action right now, and you can get to a point where you can just cycle log and fireball and take down a tower that's around 330 HP. So what you want to do is predict. So predict with the log, especially towards the end of a match, and predict with the fireball, especially we can get value out of it. So let's talk while we go ahead and play one more replay here. I want to kind of rapid fire here, go how to play this deck against all the popular archetypes in the game. So let's start with a ground beatdown deck. So Inferno placement is key. You want to pull the tank into the opposite lane, planting it low towards your king tower on the opposite side, and then what you want to do is place the musketeer guarded by the ice golem on the other side of the crown tower. So think of it like this. You're kind of playing triangle defense, and that's going to be a reoccurring theme here, especially against Lava Hound decks in just a second. So what you want to do is one part of the triangle is going to be your Inferno tower. That's going to pull the tank, whether it be a giant or a golem. And the other two cards that are going to make up your triangle are going to be the ice golem and the musketeer. They're going to be placed on the other side of the crown tower towards the edge of the map, or the arena, excuse me. So you use the ice golem to tank, and then you're going to use your musketeer to kill the supporting troops to the tank. That's very, very important. So for the Lava Hound deck, it's going to be the similar type pattern. So this is absolutely Ali's favorite deck to face, by the way. Lava Loon decks or Lava Hound decks, he said they're very easy to deal with this deck. So when you see a Hound, you're going to want to collect your troops. You're going to want to start collecting your troop cards, rather. And then once it comes at you, the Lava Hound, you're going to be able to cycle with this deck because the Lava Hound is so slow moving. You're going to be able to cycle to get 2 musketeers down. It's a very important part of this deck, and he said that people don't mention it enough. It's very, very important to cycle to 2 musketeers. So what you want to do is play 1 musketeer rather early, and then eventually you want to cycle back to the 2nd musketeer after your opponent uses their direct damage spell. So you want to plant that Inferno tower once the Lava Hound crosses the bridge, distract the Inferno tower. At that point, the opponent will probably either drop their balloon, Mega Minion, or of course their fireball on your musketeer, which was probably the most likely scenario. Then you can quickly cycle back to your 2nd musketeer and defend from there. Against a bait deck, you want to use your ice spirits on the first goblin barrel, allow your tower to one-shot the goblins after the ice spirit does his damage, and then after that, you'll be able to predict if they're going to use the mirror. If they have a mirror bait zap deck, you want to go ahead and use your log, save your log rather, for the 2nd wave of goblin barrel. Other than that, of course, you do have the ice golem, you have the musketeer, you have fireball to protect your side of the arena against whatever's coming at you as far as minion hordes or minion skeleton army, etc. About graveyard, you want to again use triangle defense. Use the ice golem in back of your tower, minions on the side of your tower, and musketeer up in the front and near the center of the arena. That way you can always defend and avoid the freeze spell. Against a hog cycle deck, it's pretty easy in the last minute because you can always cycle to Inferno tower in the first 2 minutes. Make sure when you use your Inferno tower, you don't get outcycled by your opponent. So you want to make sure you combo your Inferno tower with the ice spirit or the log. That way you can save some HP on your tower. Against Expo, Inferno can be a hard counter with smart predictions. If you don't have Inferno up, you have to use Fireball Fireball in the log. That will take down a decent amount of damage and buy you some time to cycle back to the Inferno Tower. You have to keep it from locking onto your tower. Last but not least, Substitutions. You can sub in the log for either Zap, Arrows, or Fireball. In that scenario, you'd be subbing out Fireball for Rocket. Ali prefers Fireball because of its blast radius and knockback effect on defense. And lastly, you can sub Fireball for Poison, especially in the bait meta upcoming. Ali said he'll consider trying Poison in this deck. So guys, that's going to do it for today's episode. Thank you so much for watching. Really appreciate it. What do you think of Ali's achievement? Huge shout out to him for sharing this nice review on this great control deck. So guys, thanks again for watching, and as always, take care, guys.